Hey everybody, BTO Pro here. Today we're going to talk about abstraction and why it's really important when you actually integrate a web component into the endpoint integration, right, in your application itself or many web pages, that you use your own tag with the semantic intention. Semantic is key. So age-old tale as old as time. Naming things and apparently wording is very difficult. So naming things is critical. We're going to look at a web component I was able to replace in our Killing Polymer series, in which I was able to get rid of paper-dialog. Now, paper-dialog was like one of those ones I was like, oh, thank God, a dialogue. I don't have to think about this anymore. And then 3 years later has become, oh my God, how do I get rid of Polymer? I am stuck on paper-dialog. Well, it only took like 25 minutes because I found a really well-made tag, and then I put that into a tag we had already made. So let's dig in. If you want to learn more about our projects, you can go to hackstheweb.org. I'm going to be working on our mono repo today. This is where all our elements publish from. Now, what you're going to see today is pre-published. This is going to be the next release. We're still cleaning some stuff up for republishing our entire mono repos, 200 some elements. And it's a pretty major update. Probably the biggest of the year, quite frankly, as far as hacks, updates, and enhancements. So let's dig in. Let's look at web-dialog in Simple Modal. And if I'm head bobbing along, today is provided by FeedMe. Really good EDM. Okay, so what we're going to see is, in a past life, I had at Polymer paper-dialog / paper-dialog.js. So what I've replaced it with is this thing called web-dialog. Now, web-dialog is something I stumbled on by this cat. It's very impressive, particularly because it does focus trapping really well by using an element that just focus traps things. So anything within an element, you can't escape it while it's kind of in this mode to say, hey, no focus outside of here. Really hard accessibility issue associated with dialogues. So let's look at an example of what they put together. So you can hit the button, you get a dialogue. Hit the button, get a dialogue. I'm hitting escape to get out of these. And you can see here's a focus trap. So I'm hitting tab, and it's not letting me get beyond the boundaries of this window. Now, if I hit escape, I still get out of it. But if I open this up, you can see maybe you have a prompt or you make someone, respond to a ULA, something like that. Hit OK. Maybe we take up the entire screen, and my window's in the way here, but there's an OK button, right? So it has a lot of niceties, right? So it's saying how you can nest these. It's pretty cool. Very well made. So, all right, stuff. So how do we use this? Okay. So what I did is I installed this from NPM, and this is published on npmjs.com. The package name is just web-dialog. You can snag it. So let's look at how web-dialog is leveraged. So we'll search for web-dialog in here. So we can see, for one, I target things that are slotted inside of it. Interesting note about the slotted selector. We can get rid of this at :host. If you use this pseudo selector of slotted, that implies one level below where your element lives. So, for example, if we have like your element and then we have thing one, okay, but then in that we have a UL, and this is common with like an ordered and unordered list being an issue. And then if I close this out with your element, the : slotted will target this with a CSS selector, but can't target this because it's a child of this thing. Does that make sense, everyone in class? So the other thing with using this : slotted, you have to have a selector before it. You can't just do : host slotted. It has to be something. That could be a div, doesn't matter. So anyway, all right, we've got web-dialog here. Let's set that. I got what it was. I don't care. I don't want to mess with this element right now. Okay, so another thing we've implemented this, and this is a big deal from selection standpoint, and how this the platform enhancements enhance the web components specification in general. So I am targeting a shadow part or a CSS part. They're not really shadows, specific, but it's super useful in shadows. So CSS part means that you can define on a tag, and we'll dig into web-dialog if I can find the HTML for it. There we go. Okay. So what you can do is you can say this. So it works just like an attribute selector if you're internal to the element. So if I'm in this element, I could do just kind of like a normal, like this, right? Part equals backdrop. And I would be doing a selection against that backdrop part, right? So you can match on it just like any other attribute. There's nothing special there. What is special about this, though, is you can select through shadow roots. So by doing this : part, you're saying in the web dialog, the part called dialog, I want you to apply this CSS. This is a huge deal from a styling consistency customization standpoint, because previously what I would have had to do as a developer making this item, I would have had to leave behind all these little, and you can see some of them here, right? These CSS variables. So if I didn't have, in this case, the developer of this had left behind a CSS variable specifically for overflow X, if there was, font family that I needed to influence, literally everything. If I wanted to influence every single one of these, I would have to do every single CSS variable, bind it with defaults to the thing in question. It gets a little absurd, right? You can't possibly take into account every possible scenario there. So in old school, and this is why we started using Polymer at some level, there was this proposal for an apply. And at apply would be specialized CSS syntax, and never got adopted, that would allow you to just kind of define whatever the hell you wanted. So fortunately, we're out of that realm. We're not doing things that way. We have CSS shadow parts as the successor to that. So I can just fix anything, any little detail that the original developer didn't take into account that I really need. And for me, I don't want any padding on it, because a lot of times when I modal content, I've got a web component that has all the content in it. So which is another fun thing about the focus trap aspect of web dialog, it can traverse shadow roots. And it even points out, like, this is something people often overlook. Yes, you are correct, web component author that I love right now. So what I did, I took the web dialog tag and I wrapped it into the way that we consistently reference modals. So last year we made simple modal, and we said, okay, we want a simple modal. And as Nikki and I always riff, anything prefixed with simple ain't simple. Its usage is simple, but there's a lot of complexity in something simple. So what we can do is we either invoke this via events, or we put it directly in the page via something called simple modal template that you can just stamp it in the page and trigger it with events. So imagine we have a dialog that we bubble an event and call for and say, hey, open the modal and put this content in it. That is effectively the way that we leverage this. Now, previously, this was using paper-dialog. And so let's fire up simple modal so we can see what happens. So I'm in my monorepo. I go to elements and I go to simple modal. We're going to do yarn start, because that's how you interface with all of our elements in our monorepo. All right, I've got my demo. So it has some examples, JS here as to how this is wired up. But we can see we can call for the modal, and it's either a singleton, you can call it directly via window access, or you can get it it's a const that's inside of simple modal .js. So if I go to this, we can see, search for export, you can see there's simple modal. I actually have a new pair, let's add that in. I've been doing this on a lot of the single. So this is the way we call what we call a singleton, that you ask for the availability of a modal. It says, oh crap, I don't have one, and then it gives you one. So something that we've been doing more recently is this. We do export const, and in this case, we usually end up calling it like simple modal store or something like that, right? It's the single thing that provides that functionality. So then what I'll do is I'll do equals this. Okay, so this is going to export simple modal store, meaning that in our index.html, we can now either call this request availability global object, if you will, or we can do this. Simple modal store, and they both work together because they're the same thing. They work the exact same way. So I can either, and now I don't even have to do it that way, right? So this would be a way to get around the having to constantly say like, hey, modal. And in this case, we don't even use this modal anywhere, do we? It would appear not, because we're using events. It was mostly just to invoke it in the first place. So that small tweak that I put in will basically ensure that the modal was called for, even if you never reference it. So it's kind of hidden behind the scenes. And to illustrate this, if we go and we look in elements and we search for simple modal, there it is. So, whoops. So it appends simple modal to the highest level of the document. So this helps defeat some of the issues with like, you modal something up, it's buried inside another element shadowRoot, and it only goes, this gives you the entire screen potential. Inside of that, right, we've got our web-dialog, and web-dialog is going to do all the hard work. Simple modal is basically just giving a nice little bridge of the way that we call this. We can either call it via events or we can directly invoke it. So you can see here what's going to happen when I click button 1. A modal. And we've got our focus trap. So I can hit tab all day, and it ain't going to do anything. It's going to keep me on that X to close this. And the other thing, and this is not something that's in web-dialog, but simple modal does. It is aware of what invoked it. And we can see it right here. There's this invoked by in what we call. So imagine a keyboard-based interaction where you're hitting the button or you're clicking on the item. It opens up the dialog. You do some stuff in there and you hit close or done, you confirm it. And the invoked by is keeping track and going, okay, that just closed. Now we need to shift focus back to the thing that the user engaged with previously. So if I go to fire an event, bubbles up. And in fact, in this example, it illustrates that you can inject a button that has its own event binding of itself. So if I hit that, it'll say, I kept your event, and now I will close. And then we see the focus go back to the fire an event. So now I can tab back to this one, close, tab forward, right? And we get this very slick interaction within the context of where you're supposed to be. Otherwise, you end up doing this. See, I'm tabbing through everything to get back to the thing in question, every single thing, right? That is what it's saving someone using a keyboard from having to engage in. Okay, so that's web-dialog. Now, the big takeaway from this is I have a wrapper on that thing. I didn't use paper-dialog everywhere because I didn't write paper-dialog. And so this is a little confusing aspect of web components for sure. Even if you use our stuff, with the exception of these things that are intended to be a singular item, right? I would use them and wrap them in something else. Even potentially with something like simple modal. I might put it in something like our cool -modal- for this project or whatever, like something semantically specific to what your project is. And the reason is, today you might love this modal. In fact, you might love the web-dialog and just implement it directly. How about next month? What about next quarter? What about a year from now? What about 3 years from now? I don't know. I can't guarantee that. But I can guarantee I'm going to need a modal. I don't give a crap how it's formed inside that shadowRoot. So keep this in mind, that mental model. When you're building something, do I ever want to do this again? Is a question I ask myself. How can I minimize me having to do work ever again in this area? I don't want to ever make a modal or think about it again. It's the way I approach fill in the blank modal with anything else. I did it with Toast as well. So this was a pretty easy replacement, honestly. And another reason I selected, if you're asking yourself, well, why not just make all of your own stuff every time? web-dialog is very well made. It's written, and it has this focus trap thing, which is just fantastic. I cannot produce what focus trap does. I don't understand the level of accessibility, sophistication that this has personally. I am going to defer to this person's not like logic associated with this. So there's that. There's also, this is built on lit HTML and lit element, right? I go into, bundle phobia, and I can see, all right, there's some dev dependencies. I don't actually even see any dependencies here. That doesn't make any sense. Focus Trap has 0 dependencies. That's another biggie, right? Now, if we get into, let's not save that. Let's get into web-dialog. Okay. And we look at package, dependencies, focus trap. So this has very minimal dependencies as well. That's what I'm looking for when I adopt someone else's stuff, to be perfectly honest. I don't even know that this has a dependency on lit HTML. This looks like it's vanilla. It's awesome. They just have examples of how well it integrates with lit HTML. So the way that I'm leveraging the template, and we'll see how the events work as we juggle these kind of. So we've got some additional area attributes on here. They automatically set this, but I just put that in. Now, the way to make it show is open is triggered. So then it has events of open and close. I don't even think it uses modal. I'll be perfectly honest. Let's get rid of modal. Everything's a modal here. So opened, right? If we toggle that state, we can make this thing show up. And in fact, this opened, I don't need it there. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. So we took out a little bit of logic in there. We'll see that we get the exact same thing, right? Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what triggers that to actually open. All right. So the opened variable, and this is how you end up getting this like property drill down, right? You're supposed to have events take place in a thing and listen for them. And if you want to influence it, you're not supposed to call direct functions. You're supposed to modify properties. So props down, events back up. So, okay. So how are we, as the thing consuming this, saying, hey, web-dialog, it's time to open? And if you're not familiar with this syntax, this is lit elements way of saying this is a Boolean operation. So make sure that the Boolean value is set. It just helps with data types, even though this .opened is a Boolean. So we can see in my element, right, I'm in simple modal, I have opened. If you're not familiar with this spread operator with properties, I do that because our element could potentially have other things mixed into it. It doesn't in this instance. So we have our constructor, and we have a default state of closed, right? That makes sense. Then in lit element, we get a change record for updated. And we say, if we are opened or something changes with opened, right? That means it's either true or false. So if it's true, in this case, so it's, sorry, that's if it's false. Let's do true first. So if it's true, and this is a way I was able to bridge functionality in a very lightweight manner, to be perfectly honest. So one of the nice things with paper-dialog, you could have a button and you could say, this button is dialog dismiss. And what would happen is it would automatically know, hey, you want to close the dialog, even though it has no association to it. So an easy way I was able to replicate that is I say, okay, I was told to open, so we're opening the dialog. It's got the slotted content put in it. Look for anything in that slotted content, right? The this.query selector all. So me, look in for everything in me that is a confirmation or a dismissal and add an additional click handler. If those things get clicked, then we issue a close, which changes opened to false, which triggers the whole thing to close. So we set those events. And then what we do is we dispatch an event globally. This bubbles up. So we're going to dispatch an event that bubbles up from the modal, which, again, the modals are like the top of the document. So this is going to bubble up like one level, whoop-de-doo. And it's going to be simple modal opened. So it's going to fire this event, hey, the modal has opened. And this happens when opened has been changed in some way, right? So if we look at our demo for how we actually about doing that, we could either hit the singleton directly and say, hey, when you click this button, hit the singleton and say open. Or what we've done is we have an event that the singleton is listening for so that you don't have to care where you are. You don't have to know how to access the singleton. You don't actually even have to pull in the singleton. You could just have an element that says, if there's this thing called simple modal around, just fire this event off. And if it's listening for it, awesome. If not, I'll keep moving. So that's a way you can ship things with optional dependencies, basically, and optional functionality. We've done that in a couple other places. So this, when you click the first button, is going to fire an event that has just HTML blob that's stuffed in content, right? So it's a div that's going to say, hey, put this into your slot called content is the way to read this. Invoked by, which means the reference to the object that invoked this is button 1. So because it's button 1, that means how we're going to get that, oh, it closed and go back to the way it was. So let's look for show. Okay. So when we're connected to the DOM and when we're disconnected, we clean up, but we have a window-based listener. So the singleton is attached to the window and says, hey, whenever you see show, we're going to run the show event. Show event, and this is for compatibility. I don't actually think I need that anymore, but we have a toast item. This was mostly just taking it into account. And this is an optional dependency type of thing, actually, as a pattern. I know that our toast could be confusing. If you, let's say you invoke something with the toast pops up from the bottom as like a drawer item. And then you have a modal that takes over the whole screen. And now this toast is maybe behind or above it. So it just real quick fires off an event that says, hey, hide the toast if it's open. If your app uses this but doesn't have the toast, who cares? So close the toast. So we get this optional accounting for. Then if we were told to open, if we are open, then what we're going to do is wipe out the current material and then show new material. So this would be that you have a modal that's open. The web-dialog allows you to do that nesting. I don't really want that. It's very confusing for the user. So what we're going to have is always one dialog that's like, yes, there are these other things you could do. So if we're already open somehow, then just, overwrite the content, basically. If we're not, then don't overwrite the content, and we're going to just show this material. Now, show is going to tee up the entire engagement of what should be in there. It's going to set certain styles. If you put them in, see here's those slots accounted for. So I can do content or the buttons area or header. It's going to take those, place them in the right place by appending them to our tag. Our simple modal is going to have this appended to itself in the light DOM. And it's going to set the slot to what you just brought it in as. So if you said, hey, put this in the content slot, it's going to make sure that attribute is set. You don't have to actually put that in your slotted material. That makes it easier to have a node that's sitting in the page visually, and maybe you want to, like it's an image, and you want to click the button and have it pop up and have the same image, but now not presented as a thumbnail. It's actually the full image. You can do that with a simple clone in this case. So at the end of teeing up what the content should be, it just says, hey, open equals true. That kicks off the whole interaction. Now, let's say I click that X in our modal. Right? So we say open changed. We're going to set our title to nothing. We're going to walk through and wipe out all of our light DOM content. If we have an invoked by, we're going to give it a nice little pause so it doesn't immediately target that. We'll have, because there's a little animation involved, right? We'll have it make that go away and then set the thing as a just slight delay. And that's only if we have an invoked by object, and then it'll focus it. Then we issue a simple modal closed event in case anybody cares that we just closed the modal, and we dispatch that. At that point, we're closed. So that's the entire interaction end to end. Now, again, from the semantic and the integration standpoint, we didn't go, oh crap, we integrated paper-dialog everywhere. I mean, we did like 2 years ago. We said, oh, let's take this new element, put it into our modal. All the rest of our application bridges this call structure. It's calling for the singleton. It's bubbling up events. It's using a template to stamp the modal down. But it's our modal. So now when we replace the guts of our modal with this web-dialog, the rest of our applications don't care. They just say, hey, I just told you to put this in a modal. Just do it, okay? That's the nice, really nice aspect of these kind of black boxy API types of ways of treating these elements. So that's how we got off of simple modal. Let's look real quick at this in a real context. So I'm in Hack CMS, and in Hack CMS, we also can just run yarn start from any of the produced sites by Hack CMS and pull up a development copy so we can see it in the context of a real site. So this is ahead of, this is what's in master currently. We haven't pushed this out as far as published releases of anything yet. But so if I edit All right, we pull up and we've got hacks here. There aren't a ton of dialogues left in hacks because I've always had a methodology of if it's a dialogue, it's probably wrong. But let's fire up the view page source. And we see view page source opens up. We've got that styling that we had previously. We have the focus trap in there already in place. And in this case, it imports Monaco editor. So we got the things that we wanted out of this, right? It lets the tab focus go into there. I can actually tab just through these things, which is awesome. All right, we can dismiss that by clicking away from it. I can hit this button and we get just the list of these things that we want to transform. I think I have an image class, like a, what is it? I want to say it's called styled image, maybe? I'm trying to think. We have something. We have something that allows for, oh, there we go. There's a cat. Ah, there we go. Okay. That's one. Awesome. I haven't even tried that before. It already looks pretty decent. So that's what I was talking about before with the reason we don't set slot on it is the way that tag interfaces with this styled image tag is it says, okay, well, when you click on the element itself, I want you to take the image, clone the image, and then I'll just throw that in the content area. So we can see here that what styled image provides, cat seeking to kill small toy, and let's round it, make it a card, right? We got those little silly capabilities. Cat from some engine. Let's do a caption. Die. And all right, we can put in figure label. Okay, there's nothing. We've showed this isn't about hacks, but so if I open that up, we've taken that item. Oh, and there's actually the figure label title. Cool cat, a cat stalking a small toy. Okay, so let's close this and then open it again. And it says cool cat because it's drawn that from the figure label title to put it into the modal there. Again, with this cloning and not having slot predefined. And this is a fun little aspect of this tag. I can click and zoom in. If it was a larger image, it would actually let me zoom way in. I could rotate it in place. We use this for reviewing student work. I could open a new window. Let's see if EXIF works. Still got to work on that. It's able to present you the EXIF data that's encoded in the image. Still have to work on some of the layers associated with that. But again, we get our focus trap kicks in perfectly. I can go through this, close and tab. That's pretty awesome. This is switched out. Paper-dialog in about a day. And I hadn't even looked at that before shooting this. So yeah, I'd say that kind of wraps up what I want to show with web-dialog. I'm going to add another one of these associated with Toast. If there's anything else you'd like to see as far as making web components or explaining concepts within our elements or just web components in general, you can reach me at BTO Pro on Twitter or all major platforms, really. Or you can go to bit.ly/hackslack. That's HAXSLACK. And from there, you can jump into our community, ask questions. We make a lot of cool stuff. So we'd love to have you join us in that. All right. Catch you later.